Welcome to Lessons from the Toilet Paper Aisle, How to Innovate in a Changing World, a two-part webinar series from National Flavors and Mintel. I'm Lisa Jackson, and I'll be your moderator for today, live from Kalamazoo, Michigan. In this session, you'll get up-to-date insights about how consumer attitudes and shopping behaviors have shifted in response to COVID-19 and the subsequent downturn in economic conditions. You'll also see how these trends have affected the food and beverage sectors and innovation. In our second session next Tuesday, you'll learn about specific action plans that you can use to address these lessons. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to let you know that you'll have access to a recording from today's session. It usually takes about 24 hours from the file to make it to the cloud and back, but I'll let you know as soon as it's available. You'll notice that I have you on mute and that your video cameras are disabled. That's pretty standard for webinars. The good news is you can eat as many crunchy snacks as you want, and you all have a front row seat for great visibility. If you do have any questions though, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can while we're connected today, but if we don't get to your question, someone will follow up with you immediately afterward via email. So let's welcome our panelists. Oops. Bear with me.
Hi everyone, I'm John Owen.
Hang on a second, John.
Oh,
there we go.
Okay, there we go.
I had a little technical difficulty.
Yeah.
So you've already met me. In addition to moderating today's webinar, I support National Flavors marketing and communication efforts. My experience centers on marketing strategy development and execution informed by consumer insights. I've worked for several food and beverage companies in both a private label and branded capacity, and serving retail and food service outlets. Our first speaker, John Owen, is an associate director with Mintel, specializing in the food and retail space. John provides an in-depth analysis of grocery retailing, e-commerce, and a range of food categories. His past work with Mintel includes developing insights for household and home care categories, health and wellness, and consumer lifestyles. John's perspective taps his extensive experience with advertising and shopper insights. Dr. Barrett, Director of Sales and Marketing at National Flavors, also joins us today. Polly has held several expansive commercial and technical roles, supporting customer product launches through development, testing, and commercialization of new flavors. Her doctorate from Western Michigan University included exploring statistical modeling to analyze sensory and testing data for foods. Polly also holds a master's degree in food science from Kansas State University and a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Kalamazoo College. She's completed certification courses in sensory and consumer studies at the University of California, Davis. We're grateful for your attendance today, and we really look forward to sharing some useful insights with you. Let's get started with our first lesson. Changes in consumer behavior are sticking around. John?
Great, thank you, Lisa. And thank you everyone from National Flavors for the opportunity to talk today, and for all of you out there listening for giving us a little bit of time today. I appreciate it. And I'm going to start with a little bit of research. At Mintel, we have been tracking consumer behavior and attitudes as the pandemic has really from the beginning and currently, and will continue to be. So I'll give you just a few brief slides on where consumers are today and where we think they're going looking ahead. So with that, we'll start with one kind of broad statistic that kind of tracked over time that kind of encapsulates in a broad sense how this is impacting consumers. More than half are at least to some degree worried about how their lifestyle will be impacted. And this has dropped a little bit from kind of the early days of the pandemic in March and April, but we suspect that it's going to hold steady for some time and impact in the next wave, which will cover the early July period. We suspect that might tick up a little bit as cases have spread in different parts of the country, and with that increase, that may continue to fuel concern about how this impacts lifestyle. So again, from a broader, very broad sense. Next slide is up. One other very simple piece that kind of explains a lot about what's happening at grocery is actually the shift that's been happening in food service. So right from the very start, when we were tracking this and through April, we were asking this question, we saw a very quick rise in the percentage of consumers who saying they were avoiding food service, avoiding eating in restaurants, either because of their own concerns or because restaurants were closing their dining rooms. And that of course, has had a continued, and since we've been tracking beyond the tracking period, certainly, but also has really impacted the grocery business. And so food services loss, in effect, as you know, has been the grocery industry's gain, and it's really driven increased spending in grocery stores, both in store and online. Next slide. Looking a little bit more specifically at various grocery shopping behaviors that we've been tracking, a few interesting things to highlight here, looking at how things are changing over time. First, on the left here, trying to limit the time I spend in the store. So that's actually dropped a little bit as consumers have kind of eased in perhaps into shopping routines and become a little bit more comfortable. Again, we don't think this is going to drop substantially as cases continue to rise in various parts of the country. Another thing that I'm sure you've all have heard a lot about, excuse me, is the big increase in shopping online. That's happened across industries, but grocery, which had really kind of been lagging a lot of other industries prior to the pandemic in online shopping, there's been a huge increase there. Although I think the thing to remember is that while online grocery shopping is way up, grocery shopping overall is way up as well. And the store is still ahead at a higher pace than it was before. So people are shopping both online and in store more. Stocking up was sort of the word in the early days of the pandemic, and that's eased just a little bit, but consumers are still tending to shop more sort of a stock up shopping versus those quick fill-in trips that people used to take for granted, running into the store to buy something quickly. People are really trying to limit the number of trips they take to the store, which are still down, but basket sizes are up with those big stocking trips. Another big issue that was especially prevalent in the early days, but has eased to a certain degree, is struggling to buy products because things are out of stock. And while that was very high, again, in April when we started to ask that question, it's dropped a little bit. And that's kind of due to kind of the balancing out, certainly, of the supply chain to a certain degree, and the efforts that both manufacturers and retailers have made doing what they need to do to keep things on the shelf, even if that means kind of limiting the variety or the SKUs that are out there. People are starting to notice that they can get what they need, even if it means possibly means a switch. And lastly, we see about a third of consumers, or almost a third of consumers, saying they're using curbside pickup and click and collect a lot more. And that's really where retailers have been investing in ramping up those capabilities and making that available to more shoppers. And I think from a consumer standpoint, because consumers are doing that not just for groceries, but through a lot of other categories. A trip to the hardware store might be a curbside pickup. They're getting used to that behavior and incorporating it. So we think that will give that momentum in the grocery aisle or grocery shopping as well. Okay, next slide. And looking a little bit more at actual sales results, this gives a sense of kind of the increase of stock up shopping. This are some numbers from IRI. At this sort of the peak, nearly half of all grocery dollars spent were on big stock up trips, a substantial increase from just a few weeks before, but prior to the pandemic. That's eased back a little bit, but we see that holding and not going back to historical reasons for a couple of reasons. One, the fact that the pandemic is certainly still with us, stronger in some areas, growing in some other areas, even as it starts to ease in some, but also the economic impact. And as the recession takes hold, sort of more planned and purposeful shopping is going to pick up as well. Next slide. one thing that we've been tracking, in addition to concerns about both the impact of the pandemic on both lifestyle and even the risk of being infected, is concerns about personal finances. And that really, in the first couple of months, really held relatively steady. But in the last wave of our research, we started to see a few more consumers, a tick up in the percentage who are saying that they're very or somewhat worried about their financial situation over the next few months. So we see that mindset starting to become a little bit more prevalent at more than a quarter of consumers, and that's really going to impact shopping behaviors going forward. And next slide. And one other thing that's really driving that, or contributing to that, or maybe adding to it, is price increases, driven primarily by supply shortages in meat and poultry plants, driven by infections in processing plants. But also it's kind of spread across categories as well. So in May, overall prices were up 5% over a year ago, again, driven by the protein for the biggest increases. And the latest numbers in June that I actually saw this morning were June compared to June a year ago were actually a little higher. I think the total for food at home was more like 5 to 6%. So that is also going to be with us, and that's also going to contribute to that recessionary budget-minded mindset that's going to impact shopping as we go forward, in addition to concerns about the infections and the virus. So if we could do one more slide. One area where that is coming to play and will continue to come into play is private label. And private label is up just a little bit year to date in 2020, according to IRI's tracking of all food and drink sales and multi-outlet channels. And to one degree, in one sense, that's just a continuation of what's been happening for the last few years, as private label has ticked up year over year, really for about the last 3 years. But we think the reasons behind that steady increase, which in large part have been the efforts that retailers have made to strengthen their private label, to support it, to increase the variety and depth of products that they're offering, has contributed to that growth, and that gives private label a pretty firm foundation to continue growing in the post-pandemic or sort of mid-pandemic recession period as we look ahead. The fact that it's only up a couple of tenths of a point so far in 2020, we think is a reflection of the fact that the out of stocks and supply chain disruptions have kind of impacted both private label and national brands, and possibly even private label more in the short term. So as consumers have had to shift brands, really both private label and national brands have been either hurt or helped kind of in equal measure. But again, going forward, we think as the supply chain equalizes, conditions as they were in the last recession are sort of poised for us to see a bigger increase in private label. So private label will become a bigger factor in consumer choice going ahead. Okay. So thinking ahead to where we think some of the issues and opportunities that can be addressed. One, and with the particular eye to flavor, is one, the reality that there's less sampling out there, that part of the shopping experience has kind of been temporarily halted, and a different mindset in the store with less browsing, shoppers kind of getting in and getting out, being more businesslike about their shopping, and less browsing means that to drive those impulse sales and increased sales, flavor communication really needs to work hard. The communication on the pack really has to do a good job to sort of capture attention and also capture imagination, the imagination of shoppers to drive incremental sales. And we think there's sort of two potentially different mindsets looking ahead in the coming months to talk to. On the one hand, there are shoppers out there who are lockdown weary. They've been missing restaurants, and they've maybe been trying the same, doing a lot of home cooking and doing the same stuff over and over again. So there's a group of shoppers out there who are really ready for a little variety, a little exploration for new flavors, ready for new ideas sort of to break that lockdown routine that is come into their lives. So new flavors are a great opportunity there. But at the same time, and just like one more thought is that as the recession really takes hold, as it did in the past, shoppers are obviously going to become more value focused and risk averse. So consumers not wanting to spend or to potentially waste money on something they might not like. And that really brings sort of favorite flavors, familiar flavors that are sure bets and also kind of provide that emotional positive benefit as well. So again, two mindsets that kind of we see happening almost concurrently, that interest in exploring new flavors, but also a group of consumers who are going to really be drawn to old favorites. So two different groups to play into. With that, we'd be happy to open it up to some questions.
Yep, I'm going to switch over and see if I can get to our questions section here. One moment. I have lost the questions. Bear with me. Let's see. Here we go. Yep, so it says, will online grocery continue to grow?
We think so. And obviously, I think from a flavor standpoint, the implication there is that's also a more sort of purposeful, planned, less spontaneous shopping trip. So again, it puts the emphasis on really making flavor communication and really romancing flavor important, sort of an on-pack and marketing messages. But we think it's going to grow in part because of all of the investment that retailers have been doing in recent months, building up their online capacities, converting stores to be distribution points or to be exclusively curbside pickup centers. There's a lot of investment in sort of capturing that or being able to respond to the increased capacity. And that in and of itself will help to fuel the growth. In addition to, as we go longer into this, those consumers who have kind of become used to it will continue to, that behavior we think will continue. Although at the same time, the research we've done over years has shown how in spite of many people calling it a chore and people like to say they hate to grocery shop, we know underneath it all that a lot of people actually do like it. There's a lot of positive emotional benefits that come from shopping that really pays off interest in sort of seeing what's new, exploring flavors. So a lot of people will be eager to get back to the store as a sense of sort of regain a sense of normalcy, and clearly flavor and taste exploration plays a big part in that interest. So yes, online will continue to grow, but there will also be a big role for the store.
And then this question is about private brand. It says, are there certain categories that are more insulated from private brand than others?
I think the traditional answer to that has been that the more, or I guess the less differentiated a category, the more sort of generic and sort of commodity-like it is, the more easily people will switch over to private label. But again, just anecdotally, we've seen private label developed and strengthened across areas that traditionally have been pretty strong with big, strong national brands or a variety of national brands. The one I'm thinking of is prepared meals, where, for instance, Walmart has done a great job of growing share by strengthening their frozen food offering. So that's one where they're making inroads in areas where it really has been a branded role before. So I think that the opportunity for retailers to promote differentiation as opposed to just, we've got the same, something similar for a lower price will help to drive private label, or could drive private label share across different categories that may not have been strong traditionally.
Ah, very good. Well, thank you, John, and thanks to the attendees for those interesting questions. We're going to move on now and explore lesson 2.
Great, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, John. So lesson 2, as brand loyalty shifts, SKU reduction is happening. The toilet paper aisle is certainly one that has grabbed the headlines, but scarcity has hit several major aisles in the store, from baking and frozen foods to snacks, canned vegetables, and meat, as John pointed out. Virtually every aisle in the last 4 months has had some level of out of stock. And if you're like many consumers, you purchased what was available, whether that was the jumbo roll or the 50 grit. If you needed it, you bought it, and brand loyalty flew out the window. Before we share the latest data about purchase behavior and SKU rationalization, let's take a quick poll about your brand decisions. In the past 4 months, where you've experienced stay-at-home orders and you've shifted from restaurants to retail to get your food, have you purchased at least one new brand? Let me launch this poll and we'll see if our audience agrees with the data. Let's take a couple minutes and it's a simple yes or no. All right. Let's take a look at the results. And you can see that almost 9 out of 10 of our audience has purchased a new brand. So let's take a look at our data and see how closely aligned you are. Whoops. So you can see in this first chart that in a survey conducted by Alex Partners, a manufacturing consultancy, that about two-thirds of consumers surveyed had tried a new brand, at least through March. They're buying what they can find. It also shows that some of this brand loyalty erosion may stick a little bit, with 1 out of 4 claiming that they're going to continue to buy the new brand that they tried. In the following months, as consumers continued to buy what was available, retailers started making SKU reductions. A June 27th article in the Wall Street Journal with Nielsen data through mid-June showed that SKU counts were down more than 7% for the month versus year ago at the total store level. In an average grocery store with 45,000 SKUs, this means 3,300 items disappeared from the shelves, at least temporarily. And for perspective, the cereal aisle, which is a pretty big aisle, has about 200 SKUs. Salty snack aisle has about the same amount. So the overall reduction was about 10 aisles of the grocery store disappearing. It's not like the space was different. It's that retailers were able to just stock more of what they had. So this is a new strategy. I'm going to stock what's available. And as long as sales remain high, and they are, then the smaller set represents an increase in efficiency that retailers may not want to budge from. Similarly, food service operators face some of the same scarcity that consumers did. So their strategy becomes, I'll sell what I have the ingredients to make. They have a double whammy though, because they're facing a lower demand than they were before. Nonetheless, we see a similar SKU count reduction between 7 and 8% for limited service and full service restaurants. So that's a pretty sobering backdrop. So I guess the question is, how do you retain brand loyalty? Well, first it's about staying connected to your customers and your retail partners, using data, both sales data and survey data, to track what's selling, to track what people are interested in, and then adjusting your tactics accordingly. It's sort of a no-brainer to focus on your top-selling SKUs and core flavors, but it's also important to align with suppliers who can continue to provide you with the ingredients that you need to meet the fluctuations in demand. The hard reality is that some of your SKUs may face long-term discontinuation, but in session 2, we're going to outline some ways to not only stay on shelf, but to also regain some of our lost distribution. We know though that availability isn't the only driver of purchase decision, and that leads to our third lesson. Need plus value plus ability to buy are the other factors that are affecting choice. This chart shows the IRI COVID-19 dashboard. It tracks weekly sales versus year ago across multiple outlets, including food, drug, mass, convenience. And so the mass would be stores like Target. The data shows that sales across department in the center store, which is total edible, as well as fresh foods, continue to track up week over week versus year ago. If you look at the data ending June 28th, this was an estimate, it shows that total edible sales were indexing 10% higher than a year ago. And you see there's a lot of green across this chart with a couple of exceptions, deli prep being one of them. Because of safety concerns, many retailers closed this department entirely. So demand is high, the need is there. But as John noted, financial concerns and price increases due to supply chain constraints are affecting consumers' ability to buy. A survey from Statista.com that was conducted toward the end of May showed that about 1/3 of consumers have lost 50% or more of their income. That jives with the data that John showed, where people are about 1/4 are concerned about their financial situation. That loss then combined with scarcity means it's difficult to find and buy essential items. So when you head to the flour aisle to get your 5-pound bag of flour for $2 to $3, this is what you might face. Instead, your choice is a 50-pound bag of flour that retails between $25 and $32 for that purchase, which is unattainable and just, it's not possible for many consumers. It's not only the price point, it's also how do you carry it, how do you store it, and how do you use it. So we know that price remains a fundamental driver of purchase decisions, but there are other factors that are influencing some consumers as they're trying to make decisions about value. A June survey from McKinsey & Company showed about 1/4 of consumers say they're buying more from companies that are actively keeping their employees safe. Another 20% will buy the product if it offers them safety through hygienic packaging. You'll see that 17% respond favorably if it's a sustainable or an eco-friendly solution, and about 15% of people say that they'll buy more from you if your values align with theirs. Consumer tolerance right now is at a really low ebb. We've seen brands hit pretty hard for missteps. Most recently, we've seen Goya in the news, and the CEO's political preference is really creating a call to walk away from the brand entirely. So the same study explored characteristics that improve value perceptions. And beyond these outward and visible signs of compassion toward employees and to customers, companies that are delivering quality, convenience, and reliability are the ones that are getting traction with consumers. So getting aligned with consumer needs then centers around maintaining and building the trust that you've already created in your brand. That means, yes, delivering affordable value. And sometimes that means exploring ways to reduce cost of goods sold, including ingredients like flavor. It's also about, though, sharing messaging, making sure that you're communicating on pack and in store and online that you offer a safe product for both the customers and the teams that are manufacturing those products. It's also demonstrating that you care for customers through the quality and the price value that you're offering, and that product and reliability and consistency is something that they can count on. So as you're evaluating ways to innovate that deliver value and build or maintain your loyalty, it's important to understand the role that your brand fulfills with consumers. And that takes us to lesson 4. We're going to take another quick poll. And this one is about, let's see, why, the roles that your brands fill. And as you think about this, ask yourself why customers buy your brand. Do they buy it because it delivers sustenance or basic nutrition? Is it because it offers functional benefits like immune boost or more protein? Do you offer a sensory adventure through flavor or texture? Or is your brand a comfort food with a familiar form and taste? Are you offering a sustainable solution with eco-friendly attributes like GMO-free? So let's take a look at this poll. And just take a minute, and if you have more than one brand or multiple brands in your portfolio, think about some of your top sellers and choose all that apply. All right, so let's take a look at these results. And it looks like most of our participants are offering brands that fulfill a comfort role, followed by health and wellness. And then we have a mix between adventure, sustainability, sustenance, and then something else. I'm really curious about the something else, but I'll follow up with you afterward. Thank you for that. So, we've seen lots of news recently about functional foods, those that provide benefits beyond basic nutrition. Last year, an NPD group survey found that about 25% of adults claim that they're actively trying to manage their health with food. In the age of COVID, though, there's also been a lot of headlines about the resurgence of comfort foods and flavors. The Wall Street Journal noted comfort foods like frozen pizza, canned pasta, and even mayonnaise were experiencing strong growth, at least through April. We use Mintel's global new product database to examine snack, dairy, dessert, and beverage launches for the first half of 2020 and compared those to last year. And we looked at it through the lens of flavor. And you look at the data, you see that in the dark blue is what we call core or comfort. Launches are actually outpacing year ago, and they're edging out adventure a little bit. You'll see that functional flavors, by and large, have remained static year to year, at least for the first half. Mintel's consumer data also shows the value of familiar flavors. A survey in March of 2020 asked consumers to name the dessert or candy flavors that they'd eaten in the past 3 months. And you can see that chocolate and vanilla hit the top of the leaderboard. More indulgent flavors like caramel or peanut butter rounded out the top 5. So why are these core flavors so valuable? For consumers, there's a link between the flavor, the memory, and the expectation. It's well documented and it's rooted in science. We gravitate toward flavors that make us feel good, either through a known taste or through connection with happy times. And that's a theme that really resonates with consumers right now. Since flavors send need-based cues, it's important to build your assortment around creating connections that align with your brand's value proposition. We talked about familiar comfort flavors. Those are simple tastes like chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry. Adventurous flavors are a little bit more unusual or exotic blends like prickly pear. And functional flavors are those that have perceived benefits, such as acai, chia, matcha, or turmeric. Adding familiar flavors to a less familiar form is a great way to boost acceptance. A functional food that's in a chocolate or vanilla flavor, it might gain trial faster than a more exotic taste. But as John pointed out, flavor adventures still have a space, especially since we can't travel and try any new flavors firsthand. So with these 4 lessons as backdrop, it's time to turn it over to Polly for our 5th and final lesson for today.
All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. Thanks for the transition. So our fifth lesson today is going to really talk about the change in the tweaks and innovation tactics that need to happen for the second half of 2020 and really setting us up well for launches in 2021 as well. We're going to start off with just a very quick survey because we seem to like these surveys. And we're going to ask you a question around if you were to predict at the start of this year, so back in January, if we would have said, what are your new product launch plans for 2020? That's the kind of question at hand. And keep in mind, we're not asking, we'll ask a couple questions next week around, we'll ask questions around what are your plans for the second half. This is really, really focused on the first half. So let me get that survey queued up for us here. So the question at hand is, which of the 2020 new product, what would you have done in January? What would you have said? Are you launching more new products, about the same, or fewer new products in 2020? So now please go ahead and answer that survey. If people were to ask me if I would have predicted in January if we would have had an IFT this year or if we would be standing in McCormick Place right now, for sure I would have predicted that we would be standing in McCormick Place. So I think it's so interesting to think back to January, what might we have thought? So when I look at this, you know, the plan for everyone this year was more new launches or about the same new launches. Only about 14% of you guys would have said, no, we're going to do less this year. So I think that's really insightful. When we actually look at what happened in the grocery store, so here we are, you know, basically saying that we predicted more or about the same. And when we compare the first half of 2020 to the first half of 2020 last year, we actually did see quite a dip in new product launches. So, you know, a little bit of a decline there. When you actually dig one layer deeper into which product categories, there's definitely not a super strong trend towards any one category that got their new launches in. So I looked at quite a bit at beverages, for example. So things like flavored alcohol, we did still see a good increase, but yet beer was down, -50. So a lot fewer new beers were launched this year. When I look at carbonated soft drinks, no surprise there, a lot fewer carbonated soft drinks. Ready to drink coffees and teas have been kind of trending, and those also were down. So even in the category beverage, it's not like one category as a whole was up or down. Some winners, some losers within each of those categories. Same for, things like grab and go snacks. Energy bars were kind of up, but cookies and pastries were down. So again, you can't take the whole category and say one up, one down. There was winners and losers when you're in those subcategories. So I think it's now time to start to think about what next for the R&D people and the purchasing teams out there. So this example, was an article on McKinsey and Company, and basically trying to predict how long is this COVID crisis going to really influence our business. So 90% do believe that this is going to fundamentally change our business for the next 5 years. And definitely when you look at do we have people and the teams in place to really take advantage of the new growth? 21% are saying, yes, we have the right people and the right teams doing the right things. So 1 out of 5 companies are feeling like the teams are doing the right things now to take advantage of that growth that we could have for the next 5 years. When you take this McKinsey study a little bit further and start to break out where we fit relative to other marketplaces, consumer packaged goods in the food and beverage space, we're expected to see, 80% of industry executives are saying this could be huge for our growth opportunities. We've already heard, from Lisa that brand loyalty out the window. I mean, you used to fight to get market share, and all of a sudden consumers are buying what's simply there. So I do think that, if we, as an industry with the food and beverage space, really align for this opportunity, we are never going to have such a shift in the consumer habit as we have right now in front of us. I think it's interesting, consumer packaged goods is only second to technology. So maybe people are doing things different with their iPhones and iPads and computers, et cetera. We heard the message around online shopping is picking up. People are doing, kind of the go to the grocery store and wait in the parking lot for them to bring you. So no surprise to me that technology is going to change as well, but food and beverage is also changing. And, so the time is really now to take advantage of that opportunity. And again, only 21% of executives are saying we have the right people and the expertise working on the right things. So I think that's kind of an insightful thing to take back to your teams and just say, hey, what can we do to move this to really make sure that we're getting the new product growth that we need? The McKinsey study also took a look back to some of the other times of recession. And I thought this was particularly interesting as we look through like 2008. We knew there was a bit of a dip there. So they compared basically S&P 500 companies to people that were known to be pretty good innovators. So if you were innovating as you were going into that recession, you basically were expected to have about a 10% growth increase over your peer group that are in the S&P 500. Coming out of that recession, that difference consistently is at least 10, and it gets as high as 30% different. So what they're basically saying is, if you do nothing, that's fine. You'll be here, if you're an S&P 500 company, that's great. If you do take advantage of this chance to innovate, you're going to see better growth, more new product growth, and long-lasting benefit over your competition. It's no shortage, of examples of people that have quickly shifted. I have several brewery customers that all of a sudden basically were making hand sanitizer. They took advantage of the fact that, hey, I'm a brew pub, consumers aren't coming into my restaurant, but I also have the equipment and the right skill set to make hand sanitizer. I've seen that in people switching to making gloves or face masks, etc. So I think anything we can do to really innovate in the next era is going to help us not only this year when maybe sales are down a little bit, but that long-lasting kind of benefit, just looking at this through that recession period, definitely implies that innovation now will have a long-term gain. So to cue us up for next week's session, because I'll be talking quite a bit more next week as well, we do have a little bit of a kind of take-home assignment for you. First of all, in the assignment, we will need you to go ahead and get a 2-liter of lemonade. If you want to make your own, that's fine too. And just gather some plastic cups and some spoons. You also need a way of measuring out 1 8-ounce cup of that liquid. So basically what we're trying to do here is innovate in the way we reach you. So IFT historically has been a really, really strong taste samples, walk around and talk to people. And obviously we've had to innovate around how we can make that happen. So we're going to mail you a box. It's going to be a Flavor Rush box. Flavor Rush is our online portal to get samples. We've pre-selected 4 different products that are going to be in that box. There'll be pipettes in the box. There's going to be a couple pieces of paper, maybe take a look at some of that literature as well. And then for next week, we're actually going to walk you through a hands-on demo. We'll go through a little bit more of innovation-specific data, and then we'll end with the ability to taste lemonade with a few different flavor options. Personally, if it were me, I'd probably grab a little rum and vodka as well and just have those handy for, you know, it's late in the day. At the end of it, you can top in a little rum in some of those and they'd be quite tasty to enjoy. So that is kind of the plan for next week's session. And we definitely hope you'll come back with us and we'll get a chance to do some of that tasting. And again, looking for ways to innovate, ways to get you to try our product when we didn't have the traditional IFT. So thank you very much for your time. We're going to go ahead and see if there's any questions. So we're going to come back in here.
Yeah, so we go here. And
okay. So the question at hand here is, what types of flavors are we seeing innovation happen in? You know, this is a little bit of a tricky one because I do think, as Lisa pointed out, we're starting to see a lot of the nostalgic, you know, I want to kind of go back to that really strong comfort food. So we're still seeing some people just basically innovating with bringing back those core flavors. And then I will have to say, I think there's a little bit of a trend around ethnic and or tropical fruits in particular for us. People aren't getting to travel, but they're wanting to try the mango or, you know, different varieties of, you know, peaches or guava and things like that. So we're definitely seeing a fair amount of request for kind of tropical and more exotic flavors as well. So are there any more questions from the audience? All right, it does not look like any more came in. That was only one. So, well, thank you guys very much for your time. And we really look forward to meeting you next week. Next week, we'll actually get to taste stuff. So that'll feel a little bit more like a traditional IFT. And so keep an eye out for your box. If you did not provide a mailing address, or if you are outside of the US, you will not be getting a box. So if you do want that box mailed to you, it's going to be important you get us a US-based mailing address so that we can get you your box.